juicy bases added on. You can look at all the entire cultures talk about how much they eat and don't eat. And then mostly plants just make sense. More plants than meat. Really, really simple. Great sort of rule that came out. But I'm sorry.
Is pasta considered a plant?
Say it again?
Is pasta considered a plant?
No.
Pasta
is not a plant.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, fair enough. Maybe so. But the concept is quite simple.
Yeah, I was just curious to what extent is plant.
So, any vegetable. Yeah? Any vegetarian sort of option is what he's aiming at when he says so. But a number of rules. Michael Pollan, have a look. He says some really good stuff. The point here, going back to my topic, which is about systems and commitment, is there are lots of systems we might be waiting on. We might say, oh, the government need to do these things if we're going to tackle obesity. But the personal commitment is to eat right for your metabolism, which is different for all of us. Let's try another story. So what about electric cars? In my big topics about saving the world with organizations, electric cars comes up on a regular basis. We need things like battery life, so it needs to last a long time. We need charging stations, probably charging stations that look and behave a lot like current petrol stations. Because if you go in to fill up your car now, it only takes, I don't know, 5 minutes. So you drive up, you put some petrol in, you pay the money and you go. So the same thing needs to happen for batteries. You would probably drive up, you're over a ramp or a pit, your battery gets pulled out, sucked away, and another battery adds in 5 minutes, right? Those kind of systems need to be in place. That's a big infrastructure change. And incentivize the manufacturers to do this. But on the commitment side of things, what we need to do is overcome our love affair with the internal combustion engine. We all like to watch Top Gear. That's the problem. We just love it. And so the personal commitment is something slightly different. And then back to littering, which is where I started with Hugo, my Hugo, not this Hugo, is that there are some systems required here, rubbish bins and packaging labels and recycle programs, all of which exist. But what we really need to do is dispose of things properly and also use less. So my point in my article I was beginning to write was that there's an awful lot of stuff organized around systems. Government policy, organizational change, conventions, conversations, lecture series. There's not so much on commitment. And that's the thing I wanted to start sharing with my colleagues there. I also realized that just telling my story about walking the dog was good, and having my theory of systems and commitment might make it a better story, but I needed a case study. So I was in a rush. I built a Facebook group, my first ever Facebook group. And I called it I Can Too. And it's just a simple Facebook group. I was sitting there thinking about my story. My wife said it was time for lunch, so I quickly built this Facebook group, and it said, if you see something that's happening that is beneficial for humanity or for the planet, just think, I can too, and join in. By the time I finished my lunch, I had about 5 people who had joined my Facebook group. I found it quite moving. And I got really excited about it. And then it moved on quite a bit. So suddenly I found out that I had about 145 people. I don't really do much with I Can Too today, it's still there. But about 145 people were doing things that I was doing while I was putting all of this together. And they weren't just picking up rubbish. Some of them were helping older people onto the bus. Some were saying thank you. Some were waiting in the queues and talking, queues, and talking to people while they were in the queue. And they were just sharing the things they were doing. They were thinking, oh, I can do that too. So really enjoyable. So my article, my story was gaining pace. And then I included guiding principles, which is something I've already told you about. So I don't need to tell you much more about them, except to say they are big in my life. And here, in this particular story, I described what I think guiding principles are. I told you all about that. I explained how I use them inside organizations. I also told you about everything in moderation, nothing in excess, because we talked about that with regards to alcohol. You could use it with regards to anything if you really want. But the point was, when I started thinking about it, guiding principles inside organizations where I'm working, I'm suddenly getting some commitment from thousands of people, hundreds at least, but maybe thousands of people. Still with me? Yeah. All right. So then I was thinking, is there an even bigger example of commitment on a sort of principled scale anywhere on the planet? And I thought of one. It's the European Union. I don't know what you think about this. This is not a political statement. This is not about MEPs. It's not about bureaucracy, and it's certainly not about the euro. What struck me about the European Union was something that an American wrote about in this book, another great book, if you want to read it, The European Dream. A guy called Jeremy Rifkin wrote this, and his whole premise is that for the issues we face today, the European dream, which is roughly collaboration, is better placed to help us than the American dream, which is about individualism. That's his whole premise. What's really exciting about it is an American wrote it. And inside it, he goes back to the original Code of Conduct, which was written by Jacques Delors and others when they founded the EU in the 1950s. I'm just going to read it out because I really like it. The European Code of Conduct is a commitment to respect human diversity, promote inclusivity, champion human rights and the rights of nature, foster quality of life, pursue sustainable development, free the human spirit for deep play, my favorite, build a perpetual peace, and nurture a global consciousness. This is the finest example of a government without borders trying to rule themselves by principles. Did you know that if your government has a capital punishment, the death penalty, you cannot be a member of the European Union? I didn't know that. The Americans couldn't. They've got a geography problem as well, but they also have a problem with regards to, mindset. So the theory is, now we have this principled government without borders. What does it look like in terms of commitment size? Well, now I've gone from 1 person to 145 to thousands to maybe 500 million. It's the biggest experiment, a bit like you were mentioning Douglas Adams before, the whole of Earth being an experiment for the mice, which is what the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is all about, right? Oh, sorry, I just read it. This is one portion of the Earth as an experiment. And it's fantastic. And it's a good idea about what commitment could be. Again, it's not a political statement. I don't know your views. I'm not trying to convince you of views on Europe. I'm trying to say that the concept, the code of conduct of governance without borders and around principles is a new construct. And we're trying it out on 500 million people, sorry. So then I got really excited because it's my paper. And I'm writing this paper for my colleagues back in the think tank. What else could there be? And it struck me that going right back to those issues that I talked about before, we could use a dialogue on some world principles. I'm not suggesting these are the answers, not by any stretch, but it's the beginning of a conversation about what I think some world principles might look like. What if we try to behave as one world? I think it might be Earth first. Earth first, which is to say, so far we've been celebrating economics over everything else. What about Earth first? Secondly, is a principle I've borrowed from someone else: reduce, reuse, recycle. I would think that would go away with time because we get so good at it we wouldn't need it as a principle anymore. This is features in every major religion and every major philosophy. Treat others as you would have them treat you. That sort of encapsulates every set of human rights you've ever read for any organization or any country. Good parenting is priceless. I don't know quite how to write this in a clever way, but there's so much that we get from our parents that good parenting is absolutely priceless. And knowledge is nothing unless shared. This is completely the opposite to Francis Bacon, who said knowledge is power. Knowledge is nothing unless shared. And then finally, because it's my own paper, you should also think I can too. Right? So again, I was just writing a paper at the time. And if we did this for the whole planet, we're probably involving 7 billion people. So I was thinking about commitment all the way through this whole thing that was happening to me. I was talking about it at a personal level. I was equating it to the work I was doing, and I was thinking about where it could possibly go next. So what's the moral of my story? I told you a few stories in kind of quick time. I'm going to shut down in about a minute. First is this: systems alone won't do it. And yet so much of what you get told and asked to look at is about systems. Fix this, or address that, or make that work better. Systems alone cannot do it. The second thing is, commitment cannot be forced. No one can make you have commitment. That's down to you. And the third is that systems and commitment need to work together, hand in hand, just as I've drawn 2 circles. That's my view anyway. And then going back to my big question about world principles, I wonder if we're going to be remembered as this new society, this one that raises global consciousness to a new level, that tackles these issues, or if we're going to continue to be a disposable, or remembered as a disposable generation that continues to walk past the rubbish and not worry about it too much. So that's, I think, my story on commitment, and indeed your personal commitment probably holds.